Look at any world map on your wall. Africa looks big, but not that big. You might think it is about the same size as North America, or maybe a little bigger. But here is a surprising fact. Africa is much, much bigger than most people think. This is one of the biggest secrets that maps have been hiding from us for hundreds of years. Africa is so big that you can fit the United States, China, India, and most of Europe inside it. Yes, all of these places together would still have room to spare in Africa. This sounds impossible, but it is true. The problem is not with Africa. The problem is with our maps. Most world maps use something called the Mercator projection. This is a way of showing our round Earth on a flat piece of paper. A man named Gerardus Mercator created this method in 1569. He made it to help sailors navigate the oceans. It worked well for ships, but it had one big problem. It made countries near the North and South Poles look much bigger than they really are. This means that countries like Greenland, Russia, and Canada look huge on most maps. But countries near the middle of the Earth, like those in Africa, look smaller than they really are. Africa sits right in the middle of our planet, so it gets shown much smaller than its true size. Let me tell you some facts that will surprise you. Africa has an area of about 30 million square kilometers. That is bigger than the United States, China, India, Argentina, and the whole European Union combined. The United States could fit inside Africa 3 times. Even Russia, which looks massive on most maps, is only about 17 million square kilometers. Africa is almost twice as big as Russia. If you traveled across Africa from east to west, you would cover about 7,400 kilometers. That is like driving from New York to Los Angeles, then turning around and driving back, and still having 1,000 kilometers left to go. From north to south, Africa stretches about 8,000 kilometers. This is longer than the distance from London to Tokyo. But size is not just about numbers. Africa is home to 54 different countries. Each country has its own culture, languages, and traditions. More than 1.3 billion people live in Africa. That is about 1 in every 6 people on Earth. These people speak over 2,000 different languages. Arabic, Swahili, French, English, Portuguese, and hundreds of local languages are spoken across the continent. The diversity of Africa is amazing. In the north, you find the Sahara Desert, which is almost as big as the entire United States. This desert is so big that it separates North Africa from the rest of the continent. South of the Sahara, you find tropical forests, grasslands, mountains, and more deserts. Africa has the longest river in the world, the Nile, which flows for 6,650 kilometers. It also has the second largest lake in the world, Lake Victoria, and the deepest lake, Lake Tanganyika. The continent has huge waterfalls like Victoria Falls and the highest mountain in Africa, Mount Kilimanjaro. The weather in Africa is just as diverse as its geography. Some parts are very hot and dry all year. Other parts have tropical weather with lots of rain. The southern tip of Africa has a Mediterranean climate, similar to California or southern Spain. You can find almost every type of climate somewhere in Africa. Why does it matter that people do not know Africa's real size? There are several important reasons. First, it affects how we think about the continent. When Africa looks small on maps, people might think it is not very important. They might not realize how many people live there or how much land it has. This wrong understanding can affect politics and business. When people make decisions about trade, aid, or international relations, they might not give Africa the attention it deserves. They might not understand that Africa is not just one country, but 54 different nations with their own needs and strengths. Education is another problem. Students around the world learn geography from maps that make Africa look smaller than it is. This can create wrong ideas about the continent that last their whole lives. When they grow up, they might not understand Africa's true importance in the world. The media also plays a role. News reports often talk about Africa as if it were one country with the same problems everywhere. But Africa is huge and diverse. What happens in Morocco is very different from what happens in South Africa. What affects people in Nigeria might not affect people in Kenya. Fortunately, things are starting to change. New types of maps are being created that show countries in their true sizes. Some schools are starting to use these better maps. The internet has also helped people learn the truth about Africa's size. Websites and apps can show you exactly how big Africa really is compared to other continents. One popular website lets you drag different countries and drop them on top of Africa. You can see how the United States, China, and India all fit inside Africa with room to spare. This visual tool helps people understand the truth in a way that numbers alone cannot. Some map makers are now creating special maps that show all continents in their correct sizes. These maps might look strange at first because we're used to seeing the old, incorrect maps, but they give us a much better understanding of our world. The story of Africa's size teaches us an important lesson about how we see the world. The tools we use to understand geography can shape our thinking in ways we do not even notice. For hundreds of years, people have been looking at maps that make Africa seem smaller and less important than it really is. But now we know the truth. Africa is enormous. It is a continent of incredible diversity, with dozens of countries, hundreds of languages, and over a billion people. It has vast deserts, thick forests, tall mountains, and long rivers. It has some of the world's fastest growing cities and some of its most important natural resources. Understanding Africa's true size is just the beginning. The next step is learning about the amazing diversity of cultures, histories, and peoples that call this vast continent home. When you look at a map next time, remember that Africa is much bigger than it appears. And remember that behind that huge landmass are 54 different countries, each with its own story to tell. This knowledge can change how we think about Africa and its place in the world. It reminds us that this continent is not small or unimportant. It is one of the largest and most diverse places on Earth, home to more than a billion people in 54 nations. That is something worth knowing and remembering.